Heuss, who called and chaired today's meeting, and on his right, Mrs. Ylva Johansson, the European Commissioner for Home Affairs, who I believe flew in from the States for this meeting today. So very happy to have you with us. Minister and Commissioner will first give a brief overview of today's discussion and outcomes, and then they will be available for your questions, both from the room and on Zoom. Minister, I will first give the floor to you.
Thank you. So I will speak in Slovene. Prav lepo pozdravljeni vsi skupaj, spoštovani novinarji in novinarke. Kot rečeno, smo ravnokar zaključili z izrednim zasedanjem notranjih ministrov, namenjenih razmeram v Afganistanu, glede na to pa, da smo seveda formatu notranjih ministrov smo bolj kot razmeram v Afganistanu posvetili temu, kako te razmere lahko vplivajo na razmere v naši skupnosti, torej Evropski uniji in naših državah. Moram seveda povedati, da je bilo iskanje skupnega stališča, ki je na koncu tega zasedanja rezultiralo v skupni izjavi, kar precej težko delo, zato naj na začetku uvodoma rečem, da se zahvaljujem vsem državam članicam, ki so iskale kompromis pri tej izjavi, ravno tako komisiji, ki je pripomogla k temu, da smo srečanje zaključili z skupno izjavo. Seveda pa kljub kompromisu ocenjujem, da so stališča notranjih ministrov zelo jasna, zelo razumljiva, predvsem pa so usmerjena v to, kar je za notranje ministre najbolj pomembno. Torej, notranji ministri smo odgovorni za to, da v Evropski uniji zagotavljamo varnost našim državljanom, da zagotavljamo ustrezno zaščito naših zunanjih meja in pa seveda, da zagotavljamo to, kar se mnogi bojijo ali pa mnogi bojimo, da kljub krizi v Afganistanu, ki je v preteklosti bil potencialno žarišče teroristov ali pa skrivanja teroristov, eksodus ljudi iz Afganistana ne rezultira v ponovne teroristične napade kjerkoli na evropskih tleh. Najprej naj povem seveda, da smo se v tej naši skupni izjavi vsi zavezali k temu, da prioritetno nadaljujemo z evakuacijo oziroma reševanjem vseh tistih, ki so te evakuacije potrebni. Seveda gre pretežno za sodelavce zavezništva, za sodelavce tistih, ki so sodelovali z inštitucijami Evropske skupnosti, kot seveda tudi njihovih najbližjih članov, torej najožjih družin. Ob tem pa seveda ne smemo pozabiti tudi na pomoč vsem tistim ranljivim skupinam. Tukaj so posebej bile izpostavljene ženske, otroci, starejši, ki jim je pač potrebno, vkolikor so na poti iz Afganistana, pomagati. Predvsem pa in veliko bolj ali pa večji poudarek pa je potrebno dati temu, kar smo se tudi v skupni izjavi zavezali, da okrepimo to pomoč neposredno v Afganistanu oziroma, če ne gre v Afganistanu, pa v sosednjih državah. Posebej smo izpostavili visoko zavezanost k nadaljnji krepitvi ali pa k bolj intenzivnemu delu evropskih agencij, torej posebej Frontexa, Europola in pa EASA. Vse tri agencije so tudi prikazale oziroma podale povzetek stanja njihovega dosedanjega dela in pa seveda ocenile to, kar lahko zagotavljajo tudi v prihodnosti. Ravno tako smo dobili zelo celovito prezentacijo predstavnika predstavnika boja proti terorizmu in pa, kar je po moje tudi zelo pomembno, komisija nas je uvodoma obvestila o vseh naporih komisije, tako glede pogovorov z Združenimi državami Amerike, pogovorov z tretjimi državami in pa seveda vsega tistega, kar je do sedaj že naredila. Moram reči, da je bila razprava zelo burna. V nekih trenutkih je bilo celo potrebno narediti neko krajšo pavzo, ampak vse to je na koncu rezultiralo v to, da smo bili sposobni sprejeti skupno izjavo, kar je po mojem v tem trenutku najpomembnejše. Seveda pa ne smemo zaključiti zgolj z to izjavo. Ena od pomembnih sklepov v razpravi je bila tudi to, da moramo besede preleviti v dejanja in pričakujem, da bomo vse tisto, kar smo se danes dogovorili ali pa dogovarjali, v naslednjih tednih in pa mesecih tudi konkretizirali.
Thank you very much, Minister, for this very insightful and comprehensive overview of the outcomes and discussions indeed. Mrs. Johansson, Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and let me first say congratulations, Alice. I think this is a very, very good result. And it also shows that member states can agree, also on migration issues. We have shown that also earlier during the Portuguese presidency, and I think now also under your leadership we managed to find a joint statement, and I think that's a strength from this Council and from member states. I arrived this morning directly from the US, where I have been meeting with several stakeholders in the UN, for example with the Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and also with Under General Secretary Vladimir Voronkov, responsible for the counter-terrorism. And I think that what we see now in Afghanistan, of course, nobody can make a forecast what's going to happen, because things change almost on a hour to hour, or at least day by day. But it's important to see what we can do now to avoid the humanitarian crisis. This is the best way to avoid a migration crisis, is to avoid a humanitarian crisis. And that's why we need to support Afghans in Afghanistan. The UN remains on the ground. They have people there, we can help them and support them. People that have been internally displaced have already started to move back to their homes. UN Women, which I also met with, for example, are also supporting safe houses for women. There are a lot of things that we also can support in Afghanistan, and we should do that. And that's also part of the statement, and of course to support also neighbouring countries. We have so far not seen any big movements of Afghans out of Afghanistan to the neighbouring countries. But of course that could change, but so far there's been very little movements. But we need to prepare for different scenarios. We also need to give protection to those in immediate need of international protection. Many member states have already, together with the evacuation of their own citizens, and those have been working for the EU and member states, have also evacuated female prosecutors, women's rights activists, fundamental rights activists, journalists, authors, others that are under immediate threat in Afghanistan. But we need to continue that, and the way to do it is through resettlement. So let me put it like this. We need to prevent people from going on smuggling routes towards the European Union by working with people in Afghanistan, in the neighbouring country, but also be clear that we need to prevent people from going on that route. It's mainly men who go on the irregular routes with smugglers to Europe, 90%, that's our experience. Instead, we need to give protection to the most vulnerable ones, women and girls, and other activists, for example, as I just mentioned. I will convene a high-level resettlement forum already next month to continue this discussion with member states, but also in a global context together with other countries that also are ready to step up on resettlement. Of course, the solution for people in Afghanistan is not resettlement, but there are individuals that need to have the help to get to safety in the European Union and in other countries, and this is important. Just a few words also on security. One of the most important aspects is to avoid that Afghanistan turns into a safe haven for terrorist groups. We know the strong relation, or the close relation, between Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. And we have seen the recent attack from the Daesh branch in Afghanistan. So, of course, this is a huge threat. And this was also that I had opportunity to discuss directly with General Secretary Voronkov, how we can cooperate. And he told me that the UN is also ready to step up on countering terrorism programs if the new government in Afghanistan will make a strong commitment to actually avoid being a safe haven for terrorists and work together with the international community to fight terrorism. I also had the opportunity to meet with the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas. And it's clear that when it comes to both security and migration and resettlement issue on Afghanistan, we have a lot in common, and it's very important with the close cooperation also with the US. In the meeting today, many ministers also recalled the importance of taking further steps in adoption of the new pact on migration and asylum. That we are much better prepared than we were in 2015. We are acting much earlier. We should not wait until we have people standing at our external borders. But it's also important that we have our legislation in place. And that's why we need to progress. And many ministers mentioned, as also been mentioned by the presidency, the Eurodac regulation, and I will also add the screening proposal, because this is very important also for security reasons. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Dear journalists in the room and connecting remotely, we're now available for your questions. So to indicate your interest, please raise your hand physically or digitally. Let me also just forewarn you that we are slightly pressed for time. We will make every effort to take as many questions as we can, but we may not take all of them. I will give first the floor to Yanis. Yanis, please step up to the microphone. You will find microphones on the left and right side of this room.
Thank you. Hi. Yanis Paleologos from Kathimerini, Greece. Question for the Commissioner. Commissioner, is there any truth to reports we've seen recently that the Commission denied the request by the Greek Coast Guard for funding for operations in the Eastern Aegean? And I ask that because there might be a new wave of refugees coming from Afghanistan, and this could be a pressing issue in the near future. Thank you.
No, we had a very good and close cooperation with the Greek government and the Greek authorities on additional emergency funding for the Coast Guard. And in that aspect, we also raised the issue of the importance of having safeguards to comply with fundamental rights.
Gentleman here on the right.
Deutsche Welle. A question for the Commissioner on your resettlement forum next month. How many vulnerable people from Afghanistan have to be resettled? What are you aiming at? What are the numbers?
Nobody can say any numbers on that. And first, it's very difficult right now to get people out of Afghanistan. So, of course, this is also an issue of how the practical things. But we are not setting up that kind of numbers and goals. European Union, in difference to, for example, Canada, we are receiving also a lot of people irregularly arriving in the European Union. And we, last year, for example, we gave asylum to 300,000 people in the European Union. And on top of that, we also do resettlement for legal ways. And in my new pact on migration and asylum, I'm very clear that I will move to have less irregular arrivals and more people coming on the legal and safe way through resettlement. And this is, of course, now in the light of Afghanistan, very important. But I would not come with any numbers.
Irene, please.
Hello, Irene Zarkadoula with Greek Public TV and Athens News Agency. In the statement, you say that the Council will respond to attempts to instrumentalize illegal migration for political purposes and other hybrid threats, including by developing new tools. What do you mean by saying new tools? What kind of tools? Thank you.
Ja, ta del izjave je bil posebej dodan, ali pa smo kar precej časa o njem razpravljali, posebej na zahtevo Baltov, Poljakov in vseh ostalih, ki se trenutno soočajo z hibridnimi, če rečem temu tako, ali pa z izkoriščanjem migracij v politične namene. To, kar izvaja Belorusija, je seveda, če rečemo bolj po domače, hibridni napad, katere katera orodja bomo uporabili, pa seveda v tem trenutku jasno, da je v prvi vrsti potrebno zavarovati zunanje meje. Torej, tako kot to že počnejo Balti, torej, nažalost, tudi sam v tem trenutku ne vidim drugačnih orodij kot to, da se v čim večji meri zaščiti ta zunanja meja. Ta meja se pač ščiti bodisi z človeškimi viri, torej z ustrezno napotitvijo Frontexa, njihovih lastnih varnostnih sil, glede na dolžino meje, tako kot recimo v Sloveniji, ki ima kar 600 km meje, šengenske meje, pa seveda jasno, da je potrebno to mejo tudi fizično zapreti. In v tem trenutku velika večina ali pa precej velika večina držav pomaga tem državam tudi z pomočjo, ki vsebuje tudi distribucijo ograj oziroma postavitev leteh z dodatnimi monitoringi, torej z pregledi dronov meje. Slovenija konkretno je poslala tem državam tako ograjo kot tudi napotila naše policiste, ki nadzorujejo mejo z droni, in pa seveda to, kar pravzaprav vsi pričakujejo, tudi dodatno finančno pomoč.
Thank you. Gentleman.
Hi, David Boati, SVT, to the Commissioner. There is in the statement saying that you would like to work with neighboring countries and prevent Afghanistan to become a safe haven for terrorism, etc. Is there a common idea on how to cooperate with the new government in Afghanistan, like to recognize the Taliban regime? Is that something that the EU is thinking of doing?
No. Well, first, we don't have a new government in Afghanistan. And the Taliban, they are saying things that they will comply with fundamental rights and give the access for girls to go to school and women to go to work and things like that, and that they will prevent the terrorists. But we have to judge them out of what they do. And we know also what the Taliban are capable of. We saw that in the past. They are capable of terrible violence and terrible refusal of the rights of women and girls, for example. So we have to assess the new government before there can be any talks about any recognition of that government.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll now take a few questions from the virtual room. So I'll first give the floor to Mark Peppercorn from Volkskrant.
Good evening. This is Mark Peppercorn, the Volkskrant. I have one question, actually, both for the Commissioner and for Minister Hoyes. I wonder, how can the EU actually guarantee the right for Afghan people to ask asylum here in Europe if the borders are actually closed and the political message of today is don't come here, stay in the region? Thanks.
Torej, meje niso zaprte. V Evropo je možno priti po legalnih poteh. Nihče ni odrekel procedure zaprositve za azil nikomur, torej to v tej naši izjavi ni. Smo se pa seveda vsi zavezali za to, da tisti, ki azil dejansko želijo in potrebujejo, le tega zaprosijo v prvi varni državi. Ravno to je bil fokus tudi naše izjave, ki nekako želi ali pa spodbuja tudi vse ostale inštitucije Evropske unije, posebej Evropsko službo za zunanje delovanje, da ukrepi razgovore z državami, okoliškimi državami Afganistana. Nenazadnje je moč zagotoviti ustrezne azilne postopke tudi v teh državah in pravzaprav ni nobene potrebe, da se v tem trenutku ukvarjamo s tem, kako bi množica Afganistancev prišla na zunanje evropske meje, ko pa vendarle imamo na tej poti kar nekaj možnosti varnih držav.
Commissioner, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, I can just add to that. I think it's important to clarify that the Geneva Convention, the treaty, the EU acquis that give the right to people to apply for asylum is not the same as everybody that is in need of international protection can come to the European Union and get protection here. So that's why it's important that we do not only focus on our own external borders. We should not wait until people are here. We need to work comprehensively in the region with Afghans in Afghanistan and in the neighboring country, and working together with the global community and international organizations. And I say again, the best way to prevent a migratory crisis is to prevent a humanitarian crisis.
Thank you very much. Thomas Gutschka, FAZ.
Thanks a lot. My question is to the Commissioner. The statement says the Commission should prepare an action plan on Afghanistan and to make it more operational. Specifically, the German Minister Seehofer has said before the meeting, has called upon the Commission to prepare an action plan that gives additional help to those countries that are willing to accommodate and take care of Afghan refugees. So my question is, do you see any way that what we have with Turkey, the agreement with Turkey, could serve as a role model for agreements with, for instance, Pakistan, Iran, and other countries in the region?
No, I see that we need to support countries, neighboring countries and countries in the region, but that has to be tailor-made from the needs that we can see there. And right now, we do not see a huge increase of Afghans in the neighboring countries. And I think the first thing is to try to do everything we can to avoid a humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, to avoid a situation where women's rights and human rights are very much violated in Afghanistan. This is the priority one. Then, of course, we need to prepare if there will be more Afghans leaving Afghanistan to the neighboring countries, and then together with the neighboring countries see what kind of support is most relevant here to give people in need. And that could be both direct support to Afghans. That could also be some part of resettlement for vulnerable group. But I don't think it's a good way to copy-paste the Turkey EU statement.
Thank you very much. And we have Markus Becker from The Spiegel.
Yes, thank you. My question is quite similar to the Commissioner and maybe to the Minister as well. To make the new plans work, obviously it would be necessary for the countries in the region to be prepared to take in potentially large numbers of refugees. What makes you think that those countries are prepared for that? Thank you.
Let me put it like this. I think that we should recognize that we are not only the EU that need to work here. We need to work also with we need to have a global response here, and we need to work very closely also with international organizations, and not at least with the UN to do this. And that's what the kind of discussions I had yesterday in New York with the UN representations. And what they stressed, for example, is to avoid humanitarian crisis. For example, now we are supporting with humanitarian aid. The EU has said that we will quadruple our humanitarian aid to Afghanistan, where people are having their food packages. But they need also seed. They need also help to have a normal life, and also the local economy. When I spoke to UNHCR Filippo Grandi this morning, he told me that of these internally displaced people, now many of them are starting to move back to their home country, to hometowns. This could also be a way of supporting people. So I think that it's important that we are not. We need to work together in the EU with all member states. That's why it's so good we had this declaration agreed. But we also need to work globally and with international partners, and not at least with the UN that is on the ground.
Minister,
I don't think that I have to add something.
Thank you.
It's everything.
Maria. And I would like to ask if we still have any interest for the questions inside the room.
Hello, it's Maria Psaraf with Female Data on Greece. A question on the talks with Taliban, because till now we knew that the EU was speaking with Taliban for practical matters, to be able to evacuate people, etc. Do the talks continue? In which context? And if these talks could be or are already political, which are the preconditions for the EU to recognize Taliban government? Thank you.
The EU is quite far from recognizing the Taliban regime. First, we have not seen a government yet. And second, we have clear conditions for that to be able, first, if we are going to be able to continue with the development aid. This is the first one. And another question is whether we will actually recognize a new government. I think that we are quite far from that, and we have not seen any answers to the important conditions that need to be fulfilled.
Gentleman here.
It's Tomasz Bielecki of Deutsche Welle and Gazeta Wyborcza. I have a question both to Commissioner and Minister. I'd like to come back to the issue of the tools addressing the instrumentalization of illegal migration. Have you discussed the possible new sanctions on Belarus in this context, which was, I think, in recent days requested both by Lithuania and Poland? And the second question, have you discussed today also the situation on Polish-Belarusian border with more and more reports on pushbacks by Polish side to the Belarus, and with also the ongoing controversy about people stranded between Belarusian and Polish border guards at the border? What would be your comment on this situation? Thank you.
Ja. Najprej ne rečem seveda, da je potrebno se zahvaliti državam članicam, ker so tudi danes na današnjem zasedanju upoštevale našo željo, torej željo predsedujočega, da se pogovarjamo zgolj o agendi, torej o tistem, kar je na dnevnem redu. Tako kot smo pred slabim mesecem, če se spomnite, govorili o Belorusiji oziroma o Litvi, Latviji, Poljski in nekako odbili željo nekaterih, da se pogovarjamo tudi o Afganistanu, smo danes naredili podobno. Torej, danes smo se želeli pogovarjati predvsem o Afganistanu, to smo tudi naredili. Moram reči, da ni bilo nekega velikega pritiska v smeri, o kateri sprašujete. Vsekakor pa bo torej Belorusija in pa ta vzhodna meja, evropska meja, zelo hitro na tapeti, ukolikor se bodo, govorim na tapeti oziroma na dnevnem redu sveta ali pa mehanizmov, ki jih omogoča Evropska unija, ukolikor se bodo te napadi, o katerih govorite, stopnjevali. Jaz mislim, da ima Evropa še kar nekaj, tako komisija kot seveda Evropska služba za zunanje delovanje, še kar nekaj možnosti pritiska na Belorusijo. Sam moram reči, da sem kljub temu, da smo bili informirani o tem, da je večina letal iz Iraka, torej transport iz Iraka v Belorusijo ustavljen, samo deloma realiziran, torej kot vem sam, beloruska letala še zmeraj nemoteno letijo v Irak, torej je pripravljenost Iraka bila očitno zgolj na eni strani, torej da ustavijo zgolj njihova letala, po drugi strani je pa seveda potrebno povedati to, kar sprašujete. Verjamem, da ste videli video, ki ga je prezentirala ministrica, ki je nazorno pokazal, da pravzaprav da ne gre za pushbacke, ampak gre za push-ine, ne. Torej tam je stala beloruska policija, ki je naravnost porivala torej ranljive skupine, ženske, otroke, naj prestopijo mejo z Latvijo in Litvo in seveda moram reči, da nikakor ne morem sprejeti ali pa se mi zdi v tem trenutku nepotrebno, da se toliko fokusiramo v to, kar nekateri imenujete pushbacke, nekateri pa to imenujemo zgolj ustrezno varovanje državnih meja.
Thank you, Minister. Commissioner?
It was already mentioned, this was not discussed in this meeting, but I can say something on the sanctions. I think that what we see now is that Lukashenko is under pressure by the sanctions that the European Union has imposed on Belarus. And I think that makes him more desperate. And the way he's also instrumentalizing migrants is also a way for him to get the money from the migrants. And an income. So I think we can see that this is, in my view, linked to the sanctions that we have already imposed, and we are ready to do others. For example, I'm responsible for the visa code, and this is something that we could suspend this possibility for visas for people linked to the Lukashenko regime, for example.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll take one last question from the room, and then maybe one more from the virtual room. Lailuma.
Thank you very much. Lailuma Sadid from Brussels Morning. I would like to ask about, you mentioned it also, the Taliban couldn't cut their relation with the Al-Qaeda and also other terrorist groups. Who can make guarantee there is something not happen again, years ago happened in the world? And second question, why EU are not trying to have a sanction for Taliban? Otherwise, I'm sure they never change and everything is going the same way that they did 20 years ago. And for a woman, please try to support them in the way that you want exactly for the woman. Thank you.
I fully agree on the support for women, and that's one reason why I had a good meeting with UN Women yesterday in New York, and how we can support their work. They're also on the ground, actually, in Afghanistan. And also I think it's important that member states and EU continue to supporting their work for women in Afghanistan. The EU is putting pressure on the Taliban. If you have listened to the President, she says that we have frozen the development aid, and we will not change that until we see that the new regime will respect at least the core of fundamental rights, women's rights, that they will make sure that they are in a way that they really can say that they will not be a safe haven for terrorists, that they will work together with the international community to counter terrorism, for example, that they will be able to continue with international aid. So these are the conditions that we have put in place to be able to unfreeze the development aid. So that is like a sanction, if you say will.
Minister, anything you would like to add?
No.
Gabriela Baczynska from Reuters, from the virtual room. Gabriela, we have trouble hearing you. Maybe you need to turn on your microphone. So I believe Gabriela has some issues. Adam Parsons.
Hello there. Thanks very much for taking my question. It was one on a similar thing to the one that you were just talking about, Commissioner Johansson, which is that you've talked, as I understand it, about saying that we haven't seen vast numbers of people trying to leave Afghanistan, whereas lots of people will have seen television images of people literally giving their lives trying to get out of the country. So I don't see how we can just square those two comments. And the other one is about saying trying to avoid a humanitarian crisis being the best way to avoid a migration crisis. You talked there about freezing aid, but if there's no political links between the EU and Afghanistan is threatening to flood Europe with drugs if it doesn't get its way, do you really think that you can avoid a humanitarian crisis without doing much, much more to engage with Taliban?
Sorry, I had some problems hearing you, so I hope I understand the questions right. But first, of course, people in Afghanistan are terribly frightened. I should be that as well if I was in Afghanistan. We know what the Taliban are capable of. And of course people are frightened. And this is actually the why we need to resettle those most vulnerable, and that's why we have evacuated people that have been working for the international community or for EU and member states. So of course they are afraid. But it's also important to see what is actually, nobody can predict or forecast what's coming, not even tomorrow or the day after. But we can look what's happening right now. And that was my aim, to have these sincere talks with UN yesterday. And what we see today is that in some areas it seems to be more stable. Not in Kabul, but in other areas. We see people starting to move back to their homes. We have not seen big flows of people coming to the neighboring countries. That's what we can register right now. But we don't know what's going to happen in a week and next month. And so we have to prepare for different scenarios. And what you're pointing out is exactly, of course, it's going to be very difficult to support people, humanitarian needs and avoid humanitarian catastrophe if the Taliban do not comply with at least the core of fundamental rights and women's rights, and avoid the terrorists to have a safe haven in Afghanistan, and if they do not allow humanitarian aid. Of course, that's why we need to put pressure to try to have another situation, and also looking into if we can provide support through other channels that are not via the Taliban. For example, many ministers today, and I also call for more support for UN organizations on the ground, for example, but also other international organizations that are capable of actually helping people directly on the ground in Afghanistan. But what you say is of course, true. If the Taliban turns out to be the same kind of Taliban that we saw in the past, there is a huge risk of a humanitarian crisis.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Is there a follow-up question to this?
Just the presence of the EU in the ground for the moment.
No. All the EU staff has been evacuated, and the Afghans who worked for EU.
Thank you very much. Minister, would you like to add anything to that?
Ja, zdaj glede na to, da smo blizu konca oziroma da bomo, kot slišim, vzeli samo še eno vprašanje, se mi zdi vseeno prav, da glede na to, da je večina teh vprašanj bila fokusirana na neko zunanjo dimenzijo, ne, torej tudi Ilva je v glavnem očitno morala odgovarjati na to, kaj se dogaja v Afganistanu in okolici, je vendarle potrebno povedati, da smo na današnjem srečanju oziroma na zasedanju predvsej pozornosti posvetili tudi tistemu, kar je naša torej, prioritetna naloga notranjih ministrov. Torej ustrezna izmenjava obveščevalnih podatkov. Torej ustrezno varnostno preverjanje vseh tistih, čeprav so skriti ali pa dejansko so ranljive skupine, imamo vendarle v vseh tistih, ki so prišli v Evropo, tudi predvsej moških. Ilva je lepo povedala, torej imamo pretežno tistih, ki kažejo namero po odhodu iz Afganistana, govora o zdravih moških v najboljših letih. Torej vse to so tista varnostna tveganja, ki jih moramo kar v največji meri znotraj Evropske unije preprečiti. Tako kot je povedala komisarka, torej ena od stvari, ki je po moje potrebno dati na mizo takoj, oziroma nemudoma, je sprejem legislature vezano na Eurodac, tako da se bodo vsi ti podatki, torej biometrija, ustrezna evidenca vseh tistih, ki so tukaj. Nemški notranji minister je lepo opozoril, da se ne sme zgoditi, da bomo med tistimi, ki so v Evropi že bili, pa se je ugotovilo, da so bodisi kriminalci, bodisi poseljevalci ali karkoli že, pa so bili vrnjeni v Afganistan, čez 2 ali pa 3 mesece zopet pojavili na naših mejah in pod krinko iskalcev azila. Torej, to je bil velik fokus današnje razprave in mislim, da se moramo kot notranji ministri posebej, kar sem povedal na začetku, fokusirati na to, kako bomo zagotovili ustrezno varnostno okolje v Evropski uniji. Evropska komisija za svojo službo za zunanje delovanje pa v tem trenutku seveda nosi glavno breme za to, da ustrezno dogovori razmerja v državah, ki so v neposredni bližini ali pa so sosedje Afganistana.
Thank you. As Minister said, we have time for one last question. I will try to see if Gabriela has sorted out the microphone. Gabriela, Reuters, the floor for last question is yours. If that is not the case, Mindaugas Laugalis.
Yes. Hello. Thank you for the floor. I would like to ask, it's the second interior ministers meeting where Lithuania is talking about the necessity to create new rules on how should the outside EU border look like. Are there any new developments on financing the construction of the border, which is Lithuanian and I think the Polish and Latvian case? Thank you.
Well,
No, please.
yeah, well, I think it's important to say that we have a proposal on the table with a very strong focus on protecting our external borders and to reaching out to third countries with the external part of migration. And this is the new pact on migration and asylum. And of course it's possible also while negotiating this to come up with amendments, but we have proposals on the table that are actually addressing this. And if somebody would like to have additional things, it's possible also to raise that in the negotiations, of course, with amendments to the proposal. When it comes to the financing of the situation in Lithuania, the Commission, I think, have been quite quick in the financial response, taking into account that we didn't have the proper decisions for the new MFF when this started to happen. We have already decided almost 40 million euros in immediate response to Lithuania. We are in discussions also close with my services on additional financing of the borders.
Ja, tako kot je povedala komisarka, torej pomoč, ki jo je odobrila komisija, je šla kar v nekaj milijonov evrov. Sam pa lahko dodam zgolj to, da smo kot Slovenija donirali, torej podarili 10 kilometrov ograje in ko sem preračunaval, koliko ograj bi bilo, če bi v vsake 2 milijona prebivalcev Evrope podarili to količino Baltom oziroma Poljakom, bi pravzaprav bila ta meja že pokrita. Torej moram reči, da smo svojo donacijo 10 kilometrov na 2 milijona naredili kar velik napredek. Bomo pa seveda donirali, ne zgolj to, saj strani Slovenije smo v takih primerih vedno priskočili na pomoč. Ne nazadnje bi rad izpostavil, da smo v tistih najhujših letih, ko smo se osamosvajali, torej leta 90 in 91, sprejeli v 2-milijonsko državo 300 tisoč beguncev. Te begunci so bili pretežno iz Bosne, deloma Hrvaške in Srbije. Po pravici povedano pa je seveda 90% teh beguncev, ki smo jih takrat gostili, bilo žensk, otrok in ranljivih skupin. Ne moških, tako kot se dogaja zdaj, torej ne tistih, ki bi pač morali pomagati ženam, otrokom, staršem na terenu, ne pa nekje izven svoje države.
Perhaps not to leave one last question unanswered, as there's only one hand raised digitally or virtually. If Minister and Commissioner have time for one last, Danielle Weber, then we close the meeting.
Thank you very much indeed for giving me the floor. It's to the Commissioner. You said that you won't give any figures on resettlement. Other non-EU countries already did so. So my question is, are you planning on getting concrete commitments from member states during the planned summit you mentioned? And where today any other ministers than the one from Luxembourg asking for concrete commitments on resettlement? Thank you very much.
I'll start with the last one. Yeah, there were several ministers who asked for stepping up on resettlement. And I guess that will be the case, that member states will step up on resettlement. We are now into an exercise where member states pledge for the resettlement. Of course, that's globally. And they can also choose from which regions they would like to do the resettlement. And I guess that we will see an increased number that will be resettled from Afghanistan. So this is an exercise that is right now ongoing, and this is one of the things that will be discussed in the resettlement forum as well.
Thank you.
Would you announce the time of that forum or not? Not yet.
I said, I already announced there will be a high-level resettlement forum in next month. I said that in the beginning.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much to everybody in the room and everybody connected virtually, and especially to Minister Hoys and Commissioner Johansson for their indeed exhaustive replies. We've exceeded our time limit, but we've made every effort to answer every question that you've had. The topic is, of course, very important, and you can also follow the discussions that will be taking this place in Slovenia at the informal defence ministerial and the Gimnik. Of course, they will be streamed live, and you can also still register for Zoom. That is for the defence and the external dimension of the topic. Thank you very much and have a nice evening.
Farà una dichiarazione il Ministro. Buongiorno a tutti, grazie. Allora
Abbiamo appena terminato l'incontro straordinario, è stato approvato un testo che rispetto a quello originariamente previsto è stato arricchito con la previsione con un riferimento alla minaccia ibrida e con il riferimento anche a un forum per quanto riguarda i reinsediamenti che dovrebbe tenersi a breve. È stata manifestata da parte di tutti i Paesi la piena disponibilità a un approccio ordinato e completo di quelli che sono gli arrivi, i flussi da parte degli afghani e quindi la disponibilità di tutti i Paesi a partecipare anche all'accoglienza di persone che fugge da situazioni difficili. Però è stato fatto nello stesso tempo un riferimento a tutte le rotte, quindi un'attenzione particolare da parte di tutti i Paesi, da parte della Commissione europea, a tutte le altre rotte che comunque hanno delle complicazioni analoghe e che sono determinate ovviamente da situazioni contingenti, perché è un problema molto complesso e va visto nella sua interezza.
Schönen guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. Der Bundesinnenminister steht für Ihre Fragen zur Verfügung. Wer beginnt?
Wie konnten Sie denn Herrn Afghan überzeugen?
Ach, es war insgesamt eine sehr gute Innenministerkonferenz mit sehr starker Präsenz der Minister selbst und mit dem absoluten Willen, dass man schnell handelt und sich vor allem einig ist. Und dieses Bestreben, geschlossen jetzt als Europäische Union aufzutreten, hat alle überzeugt. Die Diskussion war ein bisschen intensiver, das können Sie sich vorstellen, bei den öffentlichen Erklärungen vorher. Aber es hat vor allem das Argument überzeugt, nach dem Scheitern in Afghanistan des Westens wäre es natürlich jetzt eine verheerende Botschaft, wenn die Europäische Union nicht in der Lage wäre, einheitlich zu handeln. Und diese Einheitlichkeit ist gewährleistet. Und zwar sehr auf der Linie, die wir auch in Deutschland vertreten. Die Hilfe für die Menschen in Afghanistan, in der Region um Afghanistan herum, der Schutz für die Ortskräfte in den jeweiligen Mitgliedstaaten, bei uns in Deutschland, und der Schutz besonders hilfebedürftiger, schutzbedürftiger Menschen, immer an dem Beispiel von Journalisten oder Frauen und Kindern, die ja besonders von Gefahren bedroht sind. Und diese Grundlinie war heute einheitlich, auch dass man einen neuen Flüchtlingsstrom vermeiden will.
Bei welchen Punkten gab es besonderen Diskussionsbedarf?
Mein Gott, dass zum Beispiel die Polen natürlich das Problem Belarus angesprochen haben wollten, weil die haben ja aus Belarus diese hybride Bedrohung, dass Flüchtlinge von Belarus als Waffe eingesetzt werden gegenüber der Europäischen Union. Und wie gesagt, der Überzeugungskampf mit Luxemburg, dass es jetzt absolut nicht gut wäre, eine konkrete Zahl zu nennen, wie viele Afghanen noch aus Afghanistan nach Europa kommen sollen. Denn jede Zahl, die man nennt, hat einen Pull-Effekt. Ist ja völlig klar, die Schleuser lesen das, die Schleuser werden das nutzen und die Menschen werden sich auf die Schleuser verlassen. Da hat die Kommission ja sich bereit erklärt, jetzt in den nächsten Wochen mal Vorstellungen für ein Resettlement-Programm auszuarbeiten. Resettlement-Programm heißt, für Personen, die besonders bedroht sind, die besonders leiden müssen unter einem System. Das haben wir in der Vergangenheit schon öfters praktiziert und auch umgesetzt, und es wird auch hier so wieder kommen. Das versteht die Bevölkerung auch. Wenn man definiert, wer ist besonders bedroht, wer muss besonders leiden, und den Leuten müssen wir in Europa gemeinsam helfen. Und Der Fortschritt heute ist gegenüber bisherigen Diskussionen, dass eigentlich alle europäischen Staaten diese Linie vertreten.
Herr Minister, die EU-Kommission hat gleichzeitig gesagt, dass sie jetzt im September dann ein neues Resettlement-Forum organisieren will. Halten Sie es für möglich, dass die Bundesregierung da wirklich konkrete Zahlen nennen wird, oder wird das noch dauern bis nach der Bundestagswahl?
Da will ich jetzt kein Prophet sein. Je besser die Vorschläge sind der Kommission, desto höher ist die Wahrscheinlichkeit, dass man so etwas annimmt. Was sich ja hinter Ihrer Frage verbirgt, ist eine deutsche Bundesregierung im September in der Lage, wichtige Entscheidungen zu treffen. Und ich sage Ihnen, wenn die Inhalte stimmen, und das liegt ganz wesentlich jetzt an der Arbeit der Kommission, die muss ja auch einen Aktionsplan noch erarbeiten, dann werden wir zustimmen, unabhängig vom Wahltag, weil gute Programme die Unterstützung der Bevölkerung haben. Der schönste Satz, der heute gefallen ist und den ich für sehr zutreffend halte: Wir sind in der Pflicht, auf der einen Seite Humanität zu praktizieren und auf der anderen Seite auch Wachsamkeit für die Sicherheit unserer Bevölkerung. Wir müssen schon schauen, dass wir keine kriminellen Personen nach Europa holen. Wir müssen schauen, dass sich in Afghanistan nicht Terrorismus breit macht und wir den importieren nach Europa oder nach Deutschland. Und das ist völlige Übereinstimmung, Humanität und Wachsamkeit. Und wenn die Europäische Union so wie heute einig in dieser Richtung arbeitet, dann liegt es jetzt an der Kommission, und da bin ich zuversichtlich, weil wir gerade in dem Bereich eine sehr gute Kommission haben, mit Frau Johansson und Herrn Schinas, dem Vizepräsidenten der Kommission. Die sind wirklich gut. Ich habe viele Kommissionen erlebt in diesem Bereich, aber die beiden sind gut. Denen ist auch zu verdanken, gemeinsam mit der slowenischen Präsidentschaft, dass diese Erklärung heute zustande kam. Das schaute vor 2 Wochen noch keineswegs so aus. Und deshalb glaube ich, die sind in der Lage, einen vernünftigen Vorschlag zu machen. Aber ob wir zustimmen oder nicht, das ist meine politische Erfahrung, sollte man erst dann entscheiden, wenn es soweit ist. Aber wegen der Wahl haben wir keinen Schritt jetzt bei Afghanistan anders gestaltet, als wir selbst überzeugt waren. Das werden Sie zwar nicht glauben, aber trotzdem muss ich es Ihnen immer wieder sagen.
War heute denn noch ein 600 Millionen Euro Unterstützungsprogramm für die Nachbarländer schon ein Thema?
Nein, das hat die Kommission berichtet und das halten wir alle für gut. Ob das ausreicht und wie sich das dann weiterentwickelt, vor allem hängt es ja auch davon ab, wie die UN sich engagieren, wie die Nachbarländer selber dazu denken, ob das für sie ausreichend ist. Aber ich halte es mal für einen sehr vernünftigen Ansatz, dass die Europäische Union eine globale Verantwortung wahrnimmt und sagt, das ist unser Thema, die Migrationsfrage. Das sah ja noch vor einigen Monaten etwas anders aus. Insofern ist es ein schöner Fortschritt.
Halten Sie es für möglich, dass die Überlegung der Kommission in ein Resettlement-Programm nur für Afghanen münden?
Ja, wir haben eine meiner ersten Amtshandlungen vor 3,5 Jahren war die Unterschrift unter ein Resettlement-Programm, das vor allem Nordafrika beinhaltet hat, übrigens zum Verdruss meiner eigenen Partei, weil die sich nicht vorstellen konnten, dass der Horst Seehofer sowas unterschreibt. Aber ich habe immer vertreten, die Balance zwischen Humanität und Ordnung ist die Grundlage jeder Migrationspolitik und auch die Grundlage dafür, dass die Bevölkerung einen solchen Weg akzeptiert. Und die brauchen wir, die Bevölkerung, mit ihrer Akzeptanz für so einen Weg. Das ist übrigens auch der große Vorteil dieser Erklärung, die heute verabschiedet wurde, weil sie ausbalanciert ist. Und das findet ja in der Politik nicht so häufig statt. Und balancieren Sie mal etwas aus, dass 27 Mitgliedsländer zustimmen können. War schon gut heute. Eine der besseren Innenministerkonferenzen, die ich mitmachen durfte. Sie lächeln so. Sie teilen offensichtlich meine Meinung nicht.
Wie geht es mit dem Migrationspakt weiter? Was ist Ihre Prognose? Sie müssen Sie möchten kein Prophet sein, aber wann können wir hier mit ein bisschen mehr Einigkeit unter den Mitgliedstaaten denken?
Mit der gemeinsamen Asylpolitik, ja. Ich glaube, wir sehen es jetzt in Afghanistan, wir sehen es in Tunesien, wir sehen es in Belarus, an der Außengrenze der Europäischen Union. Es führt überhaupt kein Weg vorbei an einer gemeinsamen Asylpolitik in Europa. Das kann kein Mitgliedsland alleine bewerkstelligen. Das sehen jetzt die baltischen Staaten, das sieht Polen, das sieht die Italiener mit der Seenotrettung, die ja in Italien landet. Ich glaube, das Bewusstsein wächst jetzt von Woche zu Woche, dass man gut beraten ist, eine gemeinsame Asylpolitik in Europa zu verabschieden. Und ich glaube, dass in diesem und im nächsten Jahr dieses zustande kommt.
Also aus Ihrer Sicht führen die Entwicklungen in Afghanistan dazu, dass man...
gibt Rückenwind für eine gemeinsame Asylpolitik, weil auch der Letzte oder die Letzte jetzt begreift, dass es keinen anderen Weg geht. Weil wir müssen uns jetzt halt bei fehlender gemeinsamer Asylpolitik zusammensetzen und für ein Land eine Lösung finden. Aber wir brauchen ja Lösungen gegenüber dem ganzen globalen Problem. Und das wird mit der Klimakrise, mit den Krisen, die wir in Afrika haben, in Asien haben, noch massiv verstärken.
Sie sagen, der Letzte oder die Letzte da auch das jetzt versteht, beziehen sich da auch auf Österreich? Also gerade Österreich und Slowenien haben ja mit ihrer sehr harten Haltung auch diese Gegenhaltung von den Asselbauern heute provoziert. Glauben Sie, dass es dort in der Richtung auch etwas Bewegung gab?
Ja, wie immer. Wenn man sich persönlich gegenüber sitzt, laufen manche Diskussionen anders, als wenn man sich über Interviews austauscht. Und deshalb bin ich in dem Punkt auch sehr zuversichtlich. Wir neigen ja immer dazu, über Interviews unsere Meinungen anderen mitzuteilen. Aber im Regelfall kommt man über diesen Weg nicht weiter. Man kommt nur mit dem Dialog weiter, wenn man für die Menschen was erreichen will. Das sieht man ja jetzt auch in Afghanistan. Ich kenne keinen Politiker, der sagt, wir dürfen jetzt mit den Taliban nicht über die menschlichen Probleme reden. Und das ist gut so. Denn immer gleich Sanktionen und Vertragsstrafen und Gerichtsprozesse verändern für die betroffenen Menschen gar nichts zum Positiven. Darum begrüße ich sehr, dass der Dialog wieder ein Stück in den Vordergrund tritt in der Politik.
Meine Damen und Herren, ich danke für Ihr Interesse.
Ich danke euch auch. Ihr habt eigentlich ein schönes Leben in Brüssel, oder?
Wollen Sie noch mal als Innenminister nach Brüssel kommen oder war es wahrscheinlich das?
Nein, ja, die nächste findet in Slowenien statt. Aber man soll nie etwas ausschließen, solange man nicht ausgeschieden ist.
Ja.
Dafür habe ich zu viel erlebt. Alles Gute.
Ihnen auch.
Tschüss.
Dobre, pán minister, náročné rokovania dnes, náročná téma, tak skúsme v krátkosti zhrnúť, k akým záverom ste dnes s vašimi kolegami z ostatných krajín dospeli.
Áno, bolo to veľmi náročné rokovanie, mimoriadna rada k téme Afganistan. Všetci veľmi dobre vieme, že tá situácia naozaj je tam veľmi náročná. Slovensko participovalo na evakuácii tak ako mnohé rôzne krajiny. My sme boli úspešní, mnohí nie. Stále tam zostáva veľmi veľa ľudí, ktorí si zaslúžia a potrebovali by pomoc. Samozrejme, aj toto bola jedna z tém. A zhodli sme sa na tom, že by sme mali postupovať spoločne aj v rámci týchto evakuácií. Cieľom a výsledkom bolo aj spoločné vyhlásenie ministrov vnútra k tejto téme a v tom spoločnom postupe aj do budúcna. A samozrejme, zhodli sme sa na tom, že je potrebné sa hlavne zamerať na to, aby sme pomáhali Afganistanu a ľuďom, ktorí tu potrebujú pomoc v Afganistane priamo tam, respektíve v okolitých krajinách, kde pravdepodobne ten nápor utečencov z Afganistanu bude najväčší. Stále sme v pozícii Slovenská republika, že odmietame nejaké povinné kvóty a relokácie. A samozrejme sme za to, aby sme boli solidárni a tú solidaritu práve prejavujeme v tom, že jednoducho musíme riešiť tú situáciu tam a budeme participovať na tom, aby sme riešili situáciu tam, kde vzniká. To znamená, že zameriavať sa naozaj na Afganistan, respektíve tie okolité krajiny.
hovorilo sa aj o ochrane vonkajších hraníc a o možnom nástupe rôznych teroristických hnutí v Afganistane.
Samozrejme, toto je jedna z tém, ktorá patrí k tomu a to som aj ja zdôraznil v mojom vystúpení, že je to jedna z priorít, aby sme sa zamerali na to, že naozaj musíme mať spoločné postupy v ochrane vonkajšej šengenskej hranice, kde je veľmi dôležité aj činnosť jednotlivých agentúr Európskej únie, či Frontex alebo Eurodac, výmena dát a Europol samozrejme a mnohých ďalších, kde je potrebné, aby sme si vymenali informácie, aby sme prispievali do tých systémov našimi zisteniami a samozrejme vedeli získavať aj informácie od iných krajín a tak vedeli